This is the second video in a row I can't believe I'm doing. Welcome back to Prospect Review. This is, of course, a newly titled series on my channel where I look at some prospects in boxing and I'm going to evaluate what level they kind of get to. This one's about Jake Paul. This one's about Jake Paul. Before we get into it, you might have saw my last one and my two previous to this. The two previous to this, Ben Whitaker and Jared Anderson, didn't have a name for the series. The Johnny Fisher one, there is a name for the series now. One change I want to make that I didn't exactly, I didn't state in that video is I want to actually determine what level I think the prospects will get to over the course of their career. I'm going to do this by the kind of the British standard, the UK standard, Southern area level, British level, European level, and world level. I'll add fringe world level in there as well. I'll add that in there as well. I won't add elite. I think it's very bold to say someone's going to be elite when they're a prospect. It's not as bold to say they're going to be world level, but to say they're going to be pound for pound is a ridiculously bold statement. But yeah, let's get into it. Jake Paul, 12-1, American cruiserweight. Many of you will know him from YouTube. That's really what he is. 28 years of age, 6'1", orthodox fighter, 76 inches of reach. Now, I can't believe I'm doing this. You know what level he's going to be. That's the thing. He's, of course, 12-1 with 7 knockouts. What do I see with Jake Paul? I see a guy who has absolutely maximised his potential in the time of which he's been doing this. I don't believe he's particularly talented, but I believe with the resources and such he has, I don't even know if that makes sense, but I believe with the resources he has maximised his potential to the utmost. He's got the best trainers in the world. He's got a lot of money, and he's used that, and he's absolutely maximised his boxing talent to the highest he can. Because I simply haven't seen improvements in the last couple of years. But yes, let's get into his fucking career, which is a shambles for me to talk about. This also won't be a very long one, but let's get into it. He made his debut back in January of 2020 against Ali Isungib. It was a first round TKO from what I remember at this fight. The opponent looked dramatically smaller than him. The weight didn't suit him. And he kind of came in with this almost, I'm going to say crab style boxing stance where he was getting super low down, trying to close the distance on Jake, and the balance was completely shocking, and Jake did what he needed to do. It was farcical. It was what it was. That's sort of what I say. After that, steps up later that year against Nate Robinson, which ended in a second round KO. This is another farcical one. Nate Robinson, former basketball player, I believe, 5'9". 5'9", man. That's a glorified fucking super welterweight. 5'9". Ended in the second round. All I can remember is Jake hitting him with a right hook, stepping back, which is impressive enough for a complete novice. 10 months into his career, it's not too bad. It shows that there's a fundamental understanding there. After that, we go into April of 2021. Ben Askren, you know Ben Askren as former Bellator champion in MMA and former UFC fighter. Once again, it's another farcical one. So like I say, Ben Askren wasn't even a striker in MMA. He was predominantly a wrestler. His striking was notoriously terrible. And Jake did exactly what he needed to do. There's nothing I can say, man. It was what it needed to be. That's exactly what needed to happen. He did exactly what he needed to do. But once again, what the fuck am I going to base that off? You knocked out Ben Askren, who's got more fighting experience than you, sure, but it's in a different sport, and yeah. Next up, I think in October of 2021, he fights Tyron Woodley, former UFC welterweight champion, and also another small man. Of course, for 170 pounds in the UFC, was about 5'8" himself, and took Tyron Woodley to an 8-round split decision. I'm trying to think of what I remember from this fight. I remember him getting hurt. Woodley was a big banger in his day, good counterpuncher in the UFC. Had a wrestling base, but used that to aid his powerful striking. Yeah. Once again, you got the win, but you got it by split decision, which isn't great. A lot of people say when it comes to Jake's career that if you saw these opponents on some prospect, like let's say Vidal Riley, I guess, because that's kind of a comparison you can make. You saw all these names on a prospect's resume, you'd be quite impressed. No, I wouldn't. You can hear me, and I'm talking about these opponents. I'm going through it one by one. You can hear me talking about these opponents, and you can hear me going, there's not much to base it off of, because these are simply not opponents that you can really base much off of. Moses Atama blowing out Dillian White in a round, you can base it off, yes, Dillian White's washed up, but he is a crafty veteran who's been in at the world level, competed and beat very good men. You doing that to him in a round, considering he has all the know-how he does, is very impressive. Him doing that to Ben Askren, for example, isn't impressive because Ben Askren has no boxing know-how. He's got no boxing experience, right? His boxing training is limited to a session a week in the prime of his MMA career, because that's what it fucking looked like. His athletic ability was poor at best. But yeah, moving on. December of 2021. Jake has a rematch against Tyron Woodley because the first fight was a split decision. I remember this fight being horrifically boring up until the spectacular knockout. It was a very cagey fight. Jake was doing lots of jabs to the bodies, lots of feints low, which ultimately aided him in the knockout, where he kind of feints low, comes over top of an overhand. It was a very good knockout, I'll admit. Aesthetically, very, very good. Once again, on the surface, there's not much to go off of. It's against an inexperienced boxer who, he's an inexperienced boxer, good UFC fighter, good combat sports legend, I guess, but nothing in terms of boxing, because I hadn't seen anything from Tyron Woodley boxing-wise. His boxing never particularly impressed me in UFC. It's that kind of thing. Next up, we have the first kind of win that I would add any kind of value. This is the first one with any kind of value. Anderson Silva, who, of course, former UFC middleweight champion, great fighter, one of my favourites. He came into the fight for 3-1 record. Jake Paul got the win by unanimous decision. The only reason I say this is the only win with any sort of credibility is because previous to this, Anderson had been in there with Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who is, of course, former middleweight champion. Very, 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 very notorious weight bully. Really should have been a cruiserweight his entire career. We'll get into that later. But Anderson Silva had kind of got some... First of all, he was a striker in UFC, a decent one. Well, not a decent striker in UFC standards, an amazing striker by UFC standards. Very defensively good, power in the hands, good kicks. But boxing-wise, was obviously decent enough to beat someone with good experience and, of course, a lifetime in the game like Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. So that's the first kind of win I would give to Jake with any sort of credibility, even though it's like, yet again, you can hear me kind of struggling to find points about it to really give credit for it, because there's not credit to be given. It was also again a much older guy. All of these are against fairly much older guys, I believe. But after this, February of 2023, he steps in against Tommy Fury. Loses by split decision over 8 rounds. The 8-0 Tommy Fury gets it done against Jake Paul, handing him his first defeat. What I saw in this fight was the more experienced man in Tommy Fury, who isn't particularly good himself, beat Jake Paul with the most basic of understanding possible. Tommy Fury's main weapon was his jab and his 1-2. He just kind of kept Jake behind the long shots all night. Jake couldn't figure out how to close the distance. Whenever he was hit, he kind of looked like he didn't really know how to react. He looked inexperienced in comparison to Tommy, which he is. Tommy Fury might not be the best, but has been around boxing gyms, have been around boxing a long time. He's from a boxing family. And yeah, couldn't close the distance. Was catching Tommy on the end of some shots. Drops Tommy in the final round. It was more of a slip, but the punch did cause it. So yeah, that once again, this is if he beat Tommy Fury, I'm saying yeah, okay, he beat a guy who's been in the boxing gym his entire life, has been around boxing his entire life. Then I would give him credit, but he didn't win. It wasn't particularly competitive, despite it being a split decision. Yeah, Tommy beat him with the most basic of understanding, the most basic way you could. 1-2, 1-2, 1-2. The rhythm wasn't particularly anything special. There was no feints. There was nothing to really keep Jake guessing. He just couldn't get past it. So that's all Tommy needed to do. Moving on, we have Nate Diaz. Unanimous decision over 10 rounds, which actually, you know what? An older Nate Diaz, but taking Nate Diaz the distance in that long of a fight, a 10 3-minute round fight, when Nate was known for not even being the best technically in MMA, but for being very tough and having a good gas tank. And if the fights were longer, a lot of people say Nate Diaz would have been this, and that. It's not too terrible, but really you're kind of getting what you would against a bottom feeder journeyman there. You're just getting rounds in basically against someone who's going to be able to survive. So you don't rate prospects off of that, off of them beating journeyman. You beat them. Well, you do. See, it's so tricky because I don't know where these guys are at. Next up, he comes up against Andre August, who's the first guy with an actual good-looking record, I'd say, outside of Tommy Fury. 10-1-1. He got the knockout in the first round. I believe it was an uppercut. In December of 2023. It was yeah, but once again, I say this. Good record on paper, had been horribly inactive. Feet looked slow, flat-footed, head on the centre line. Like he looked like just a fucking open target. Just looked like a sitting duck out there. Moving on. March of 2024. Ryan Borland, similar case. 17-2 record, but also had been horribly inactive. Wasn't particularly anything special. Don't even remember much about that. Moving on. I think July of 2024, we had Mike Perry. Mike Perry is known as a UFC reject, I would say. He was in the UFC. He didn't do particularly well. He wasn't a particularly great MMA fighter. Has found tremendous success in bare knuckle boxing, though. And you might think, oh, that must translate quite well. Then no, it doesn't. Bare knuckle boxing is really about toughness and endurance, right? And power. Like that's really what it's about. Mike Perry looked awful. His feet looked terrible. Didn't know how to close the distance. Head on the center line. So squared up. It's unbelievable. So squared up. Once again, sitting duck. Very, very tough man, but sitting duck. Then we have Mike Tyson in November of 2024. 60-year-old man. Moving on. We have Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Beat him over 10 rounds by unanimous decision. Julio Cesar Chavez had a record, well, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. had a record of 54, 6-1. This isn't bad. This isn't terrible. He was boxing very well against Chavez Jr., keeping it long, using his feet very, very well. Chavez Jr. didn't particularly throw much, though. It was kind of just that. It was kind of like the journeyman thing, right, where they kind of had their guard up and they're just kind of looking to survive and get through. Up until the final 2 rounds, where Chavez Jr. decides to mount some pressure and kind of did actually get Paul in a bit of trouble. Not trouble as in he had him hurt, but was winning the rounds and making Jake look very uncomfortable, which makes you think. I don't think he deals particularly well with pressure. And that leads us up until today when he's got a fight booked against Anthony fucking Joshua. What do I see with Jake Paul? I'm gonna go back to my point I made at the start of the video. I see someone who's maximised his absolute well, first of all, he's maximised his commercial potential, and he's absolutely maximised his potential ability-wise. I don't see many improvements. I haven't seen any improvement since the second Woodley fight, if I'm being completely honest with you. I haven't seen much improvement. Maybe there has been, but I haven't seen it. He's got decent athleticism. He's not particularly quick with the hands, but his feet move well. He's got decent power. However, against people his own size, I do believe it's not as big as a factor as people say. I don't believe he's got particularly special power, but he's got kind of average power for a man of his size. He has a very decent understanding of boxing. Okay, that's the point I can echo. Mike Tyson fight kind of proved that. What you're meant to do against Mike Tyson is you're meant to keep yourself out of bad positions in the ring, have good ring generalship, keep him behind a long jab, and use your legs. Stay out of bad positions. Keep a good rhythm with your jab, right? Double, single, feint. So your jab doesn't get too predictable. But yeah, against a 60-year-old Mike Tyson, the gas tank I think is questionable. I think he slows. I think the weight's artificial. I think he's more of a light heavyweight size person. But yeah, that hasn't quite yet been pushed outside of the Chavez Jr. fight, I'd say. Also, the cardio I think has come with experience. He's not used to being in a ring for fucking 10 rounds. 5 years isn't enough time to get used to that. I'm sorry. Not at a professional level. Maybe in sparring, yeah, but at a professional level to go 10 rounds in front of all those people with the adrenaline going, and it saps you a little bit more. Coming to the level I think he is Southern area level. I think Jake Paul would win a Southern area title. I wouldn't even put him at fringe British level, and definitely wouldn't go any higher than that. Southern area level's respectable, man. 5 years of boxing, Southern area title's respectable. Campbell Hatton, Ricky Hatton's son, rest in peace, Ricky Hatton, of course, won a Southern area title, and I believe he had a fucking hell of a lot more experience than Jake Paul. So, goes to show you, it's commendable. It's a title at the end of the day. It's more than a lot of people would do. But yeah, thank you for watching. I'm sorry if this video is a bit of a mess. How could it not be a fucking mess? I'm talking about Jake Paul. This is someone I pretty much refuse to talk about. But considering he's got a fight lined up against Anthony Joshua, it's a big fight. It kind of just makes sense. So thank you for watching. Goodbye.